Good morning. Welcome to the green room. By the way, this is not amplifying my voice. I don't need an amplifier. But we are recording this with video, and we do all of our Edge and Educations with the video recordings so that we can post it on the website. And if community members or the public are interested, they have an opportunity to see what's going on. First thing I want to say is how heartened I am to see so many of you here, because what that tells me is that you care about what's happening at the school and you want to be involved in the great journey that is ISP. So welcome to the Edge and Education. I'm going to just say a few words of introduction. I'm going to hand it over to Teresa to introduce Mark Church. So the theme for this year is connected to these areas of creativity and critical thinking. And we recently had Kat Murdoch talk to us about inquiry, and Danny Gregory, who spent quite a bit of time at the school speaking about sketch journalism and creativity. And now we're going to continue our journey with Mark Church, who's going to speak to us about cultures of thinking. And Mark has been with us all week, and you'll hear more about that, but it's been a great week of work with Mark. And then in April, we're going to be speaking about design thinking. As always, we draw our inspiration as well as our direction and guidance from the mission of the school. And the mission is broken into three parts: the why, and the how, and the what. And if you're not familiar with the mission of the school, I urge you to take another look at it, because it does talk about ultimately what we want for kids. I think as parents, we all want the same thing for our children. In today's talk, we've highlighted the word purposeful from the mission. Learning at a school and preparing the learning and framing the learning for all learners, and we are all learners, that's why you're here, has to be purposeful. If one is not familiar with the job of a teacher, and I think you'll hear more about this from Mark, one may think perhaps it's kind of an easy thing to do, and I can assure you that in fact it is a complex task. And really framing the learning and framing the thinking is daunting sometimes, but working in a school and being purposeful about the learning is very, very important. The second piece of the mission is the fact that what we do, obviously, is student-centered and focused on the student. And that is true on many, many levels. And again, it's thinking about each individual student, not just a classroom of students. And then finally, as I mentioned, an important competency in today's world especially is to think critically and creatively. Both of those are extremely important for our kids, for all of us, in facing what the world, the rapidly changing world, is bringing to us. And these are essential skills. Of course, foundational literacies are very important. It's our bread and butter as schools, but if that's all that students come out of ISP with, then we haven't fulfilled our mission. And so to help take us on this journey will be Mark Church. I'm going to ask Teresa Belisle, our Director of Learning, Research and Development, to introduce Mark. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you for coming. This is so exciting to see so many who've come to think with us today. So thank you. I know it's tough to get time out of your schedule, but we really appreciate this. And thanks to Carmen, Rebecca, and Jay for helping organizing and getting this to happen. So we are thrilled, and we've had a fantastic 3 days with Mark Church. Mark is an international educator. He's a coach. He works with Harvard Project Zeros. Two of them, making thinking visible and also developing cultures of thinking. There are many organizations and many books and many authors who talk about thinking. Nobody owns that idea. What's exciting is what Project Zero has done is gone out and actually researched what do deep thinkers do and what are the implications for us in education. He has tried them out. As an educator, he has worked with others trying them out. He has been part of a research team that has looked at it. So he has a wonderful perspective, multiple, varied perspective, and has brought so much to our thinking and discussions this week, which he'll do with you today. So Mark was part of a co-author, as you know, of Making Thinking Visible, along with Ron Richard and Karen Morrison. All of these people have done research and work with international schools around the world. And what's exciting about here is always not saying we have the answer and you have to adopt this. It's let's figure this out together and let's actually do the research and make sure what we're doing is very thoughtful and has an impact on learning. So we are very excited, as obviously our theme is not only thinking this year, but it's central to our mission, and we know it's key to learning. So Mark is really helping us further cultivate how are we thinking together? How are we asking questions? How are we nurturing thinking in each other as professionals and with those with whom we're working in the classroom? So without further ado, I welcome Mark Church. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. How are you? You doing all right? There's a lot of people in this room right now. I'm just wondering, where should you have been right now? Because there's a lot of empty space somewhere out there in the community, because there's a lot of people in this room. But no. So whatever you've put to the side to come into this space today, just really appreciative of that, and just really acknowledge, that people have busy lives. But what does it say about this school community, that having so many people who want to come in and be part of the conversation about what's going on for learners in this place, in this school. So it's really nice to meet you, and for the next hour or so, we'll have some conversation around these ideas that Teresa was just speaking to you about in terms of the work that we do in our project. This idea of making thinking visible. What's the story of learning in this place? And how do we become more aware of that? What do we want that story to be? Those are the kinds of questions we start asking in terms of our research team, but also with those that we partner with. And I think it says a lot about ISP too, for them to really undertake this. I mean, I look at the other folks that have come here to have conversations with you, and the teachers here, Kath Murdoch, and some of the others that Arnie was mentioning. I think it says a lot about a school when they really think about the kind of ideas they want to interact with and questions they want to engage in service of the learning that happens here. And I think an awful lot about just this whole idea of investing in ongoing development, and professional development in particular. And I'm just always reminded of, the quality of learning that happens in those classrooms for our kids cannot exceed the quality of the people leading that learning. And so for a school to really commit to, we want to invest, we want to hire really good people, really well-qualified people, but we also have a commitment to their ongoing development, because we know that their quality matters, because they're leading learning. I think that says a lot. And I think it says a lot too for them to provide, opportunities for parents to come and be a part of that conversation. So anyway, thanks for that. And as Teresa just mentioned, so I was a teacher for a number of years, actually. And actually I taught in Europe for many years. I was at the International School of Dusseldorf and the International School of Amsterdam for several years. And got really involved with ideas around Project Zero's Teaching for Understanding and their work around visible thinking. Eventually, I moved over into the educational research side of things. But anytime I get to come back to an international school, especially in Europe, it just makes me feel like I've come home. So that's another reason I'm thanking you. But what I want to say here is, as a group of researchers at Project Zero, there's several different research projects going on, and today we're going to talk about making thinking visible, or at least scratch the surface of that somewhat. One thing that I've been saying to the teachers, and I think it's probably important for me to mention to all of you here as well, as a group of researchers, we're not program developers. We're not curriculum writers. It's not like we've designed this sort of intervention and then we package it up and then we sell it to the masses. That's just not what we do. There are other, groups and other organizations that function in that way, but we don't have a product or program to go and peddle. What we have as a group of researchers is a set of questions. There are certain questions that we're curious about, certain things that we're perplexed by, and then we sort of roll up our sleeves and kind of get our heads in that space. What can we learn about these things? So I thought one way to kind of get into this conversation with you today, just so you can understand sort of the landscape in which we're operating upon, is to share with you some of the questions we're curious about. And also, these are the questions I was sharing with the teachers this week in various formats as we've had different convenings. So one of the questions that we're really curious about in our project is a question about messages. You know, what messages are we sending students about what learning is and how learning happens? Lots of kids in the hallway there, and didn't get a chance to talk very deeply with all of them because they're all very busy kids, right? Going to lots of places there. But, you know, I could say, oh, tell me about ISP. What is ISP like? Oh, you like going to school here? And eventually I might say to them, so the teachers at ISP, you reckon they want you to learn? It's a leading question. I hope they say yes. I'm sure they would. At some point, I'd like to ask some group of kids, well, when the teachers at the International School of Prague say they want you to learn, what do they want you to do? What comes off those students' tongues next would be very interesting to figure out. Because kids have conceptions. Oh, when the teachers say they really want us to learn something, what they really mean is this. What is the this? In Mr. So-and-so's class, he means this. But when we're in Miss So-and-so's class, what she really means is this. Again, the this is really important for us to start to figure out. And I encourage teachers to really start unpacking that. Because for teachers going into a classroom, I might say to a group, hey guys, I really want us to learn this. It's really important that we learn this. And a teacher, or even a parent, might have an idea of what that is. But if we have one idea of what that is, and the students have another idea of what that means, there could be a disconnect. And so that's why we think it's really important for us to start understanding, well, what do kids actually think learning is? And once we figure that out, then how do we add value to that? How do we grow that? How do we broaden that from whatever they're bringing? So one question we're interested in is a question of messages. A second question we're interested in our project is, well, whatever the messages they have about learning, whatever their conceptions are of what they think learning is, it's how do they get those messages? And we would start to make a case that the way that these students, your children, these students at this school, get a sense of what learning is they've been in classroom after classroom after classroom, year after year after year. And every one of those classrooms has communicated a little bit more of the story to them. And so that's why a second question we're curious about in our project is a question about culture. You know, how do we take more notice of the culture of our classrooms, and what is the culture actually communicating to our students about the value, the importance of learning, thinking, what it means to develop understanding? Culture's, kind of a, it's not long in length, but it's big in meaning, right? There's lots of ways of looking at culture, but maybe one way of thinking about culture is this. Well, I asked the teachers this the other day, so I'll ask you this. It's a very leading question. Have any of you had the experience of maybe living in a place that's different than where you grew up? Anybody in this room? Let me see your hands. Or you've traveled to places that are different than where you grew up? Yeah, probably most of you here, right? Well, think about it this way. You weren't in that new culture very long, and you got a sense of, oh, certain things matter in this place. Certain things get talked about here. Certain things get celebrated. Certain things have prominence or certain meaning that could be similar to back home or could be different. But just consider that idea, that culture is a huge message conveyor. This is what we're on about. This is our story in this place. So that's why we think about this idea of culture as a message communicator. And in terms of schools, and I invite teachers to really consider that, okay, in your classroom, of course you're thinking, I've got to teach social studies, I've got to teach math, or I've got to teach science. But ultimately that math or that science or reading and writing still sits within the culture you create around that. And so this is where schools get so busy, lots of schools get busy of getting the right curriculum in place, getting the right syllabus, getting the right assignments and exam schedules and policies and all these things in place. And schools need to, right? Schools are systems, and you need to have things to have a semblance of order, if you will. But what we would argue is just getting all those things in place isn't enough, because those things still sit within the culture that each one of our teachers wraps around that. And that's why this teacher and myself, I'm going to just pretend that you're a teacher, we could both be teaching the same course, 7th grade mathematics, right across the hallway from one another. We do the same assignments, we give the same homework, we follow the same series, we do the same projects, we have the same report cards. But at the end of all of it, we can't fool ourselves. Her students and my students could come out with different learning outcomes. And how could that be? Because we followed the same syllabus. We did the same scope and sequence. That may be true. But this teacher over in her room, what she's talking with her students about, what she draws their attention to, when she decides to step in and when she steps back, the kinds of questions she's asking, what she models for them, and all of those things in my classroom, what I model, what I talk about, what I spend time on, could be fundamentally, distinctively different, even though we're doing the same stuff. And how will these two teachers ever know that? Because we're just busy trying to get through the stuff. And so that's why we really are trying in our project of raising awareness of teachers. How are we really becoming aware of the culture? And the culture is this thing in which we're swimming, but yet it's hard to pay attention to it unless we figure out ways to study that, pay attention to that, and understand it. So a third question we have in our project is then this question of thinking. Where does thinking matter here? How will students know at the International School of Prague or any other school, this is a place where my thinking matters, it has visibility, it has value. These teachers here, wow, they're really listening to me, they're really listening to us. It matters to their ongoing instruction. Or might the kids get counter messages to that? Look, kids, those ideas don't really matter here. We got to get through this stuff. I don't think any of you want that for your kids, and I don't think any of these teachers want that for their students. But yet we also know when schools become very busy places and there's a lot to get done in too little time, it's easy for schools just to become a culture of just getting through the work, just getting work done, and not really paying attention to what's the thinking that the students are doing within that work that's moving them forward or deeper or further. So these are the three questions that we're thinking an awful lot about in our project. And in the world of research, there's lots of other questions to be taken on. I mean, Kath Murdoch would, she would have her set of questions that she's looking about an inquiry, but you can see how just like, well, I guess like the ISP logo, a lot of these ideas keep weaving together because they're really sharing a lot of synergy, if you will. What does it really mean to pay attention to these things, be intentional about these things? How do these things drive our choices with our learners so that this school isn't just these kids come in and they're just passive recipients of our grand virtuoso? I don't think that you want to pay good money for that. And I also think you want something more for your students. You want them to be not just these passive recipients of somebody else's ideas. So those are the ideas we're talking about. That was also a lot of talking at you. Why don't you have a moment at your table there? Actually, if you go one by one around your table, that will be forever. So just with one person, that one friend that you've got next to you, just what makes sense to you? What resonates with you? How does that connect with some of the things you've already been thinking about? Like what sits well with you? Go ahead and just have a little response time with the people next to you. So we're talking about these kinds of questions, right? And, you know, because these are a set of questions, you know, this isn't a program to implement, but rather these are ideas to continue as a teacher or as a community to continue to think about. You know, what messages are we sending our kids about what learning is? And how are those messages consistent with what we know of the kind of thinkers we want them to be long after these school years are over? You know, how do we become aware of the messages we're sending and what the culture of our classrooms, maybe even the cultures of our family, are communicating to our students, right? I mean, the realm of, you know, family dynamics is not my research area. But that's your experience. But still, I want you to continue to think about where do these ideas, you know, matter to what's happening in classrooms, but also where might there be some parallels for you in sort of what you're hoping and wishing for your children. Because your children won't be children forever. Someday they will be our age, right? So what do we wish for them? And what messages do we want them to think about learning, and where does their thinking matter in that? We're talking about creating a culture of thinking rather than a culture of just get the work done. Nothing wrong with work. Work's important, but there's a difference when the work just feels like it's work just to be done, or when the work feels like it's really taking our learning far. So what would it mean? I keep asking the teachers, what would it mean for my classroom to be a culture of thinking? What is this idea of a culture of thinking as opposed to a culture of just make these kids endure me? Right? So this idea of a culture of thinking, that phrase, a culture of thinking, that may be unfamiliar, an unfamiliar term. You may not have heard it phrased in such a way. But I'd like to start putting out this sort of idea that the very nuance of a culture of thinking, the very essence of what a culture of thinking is not a new thing. You know, in fact, I would, I'm not much of a betting person, but if I were to make a bet, I would say somewhere along your journey from birth till now, you've been part of a culture of thinking yourself. And it mattered to your learning. So I want you to consider this for a moment. Don't do any turning and talking, but it looks like you've got something you could write with or write on, or you could tap some notes out on your phone. Just some bullet points. I want you to think of a time when and where you've been part of a group that did really good thinking together, that advanced your learning. It mattered to what you learned. So I don't want you just to pick a fun group that you had a good time with. Though those groups are okay too. And it may be that was an element of it, but think of a group that was really one of the groups you've been a part of that was a really good thinking group for you, and it mattered. It pushed your learning far. A book club, a parenting group, a university cohort. But before you talk with anybody, I want you to get a few bullet points down, just a few dot points down. What made that group that way? What were the factors or the influences or the features that made that group such a good thinking group for you? Because we did this, that's why we did such good thinking together. Because this quality was there, that's why we did such good thinking together. Could you just bullet point out a couple of thoughts around that? When and where have you been part of a group that did good thinking together, and what made it that way? Just take 45, 60 seconds of silence to get some notes down first. So when you're ready, with the one person next to you, share with them the group you were a part of that did good thinking, and really get into talking about what made that group such a rich thinking group. You don't have to come to agreement. It's not a consensus thing. But what were some of the features and some of the qualities? When we're ready to come back together, I'll put my hand up. So go ahead and talk with your partners there. What made it that way? So I'm hoping by the level of conversation that was happening in the room just now that indeed, somewhere along the line, you've been part of a culture of thinking before. You may not have called it that, but you were part of a group whereby there was a lot of good thinking happening there, and it wasn't just a nice thing or a warm and fuzzy thing, but it was significant. It mattered to your learning. Though I was saying to the teachers the other night in the same conversation, I was like, I wonder if I asked the opposite question someday. When and where have you been part of a group that didn't do good thinking together? Have you ever had one of those experiences? And what made that group that way, right? I think we've all had those counter experiences as well. But trying to understand what made them that way rather than, oh, because the stars aligned or we hit the lottery or it was just a lot of good luck. But what made it that way, I think, is a really important point of analysis for us, just kind of in a very layman's terms here. because it helps to give insight into some of the features that lend themselves to a rich thinking culture that matters to learning. So as you were talking there, again, I didn't ask people to come to consensus or anything, but what were some of the qualities and features in these groups that you were a part of that did really good thinking together? What was one thing that came up for you? Yeah, please.
Yeah, so in our group, he said something that is really interesting, because she was saying that at university or at school basically when she was young, she felt she was just like absorbing the information, but she wasn't really like learning anything. And then he was saying that sometimes it's because you're not ready to learn or to accept the knowledge from other people, you're just absorbing it. And then once you're old enough and you're receptive, then you can transform that information that is given to you.
So in groups that you were part of that did good thinking together, you could do something with the information, it sounds like, that you could work with it. Did I hear that right?
Yeah, but I understood that it was like when you're ready to, because the information can be there. But
So
if you're
our
not
group
ready,
had a willingness and we were ready to do something with the information. What about from your experiences? What were some of the features from your experiences? Yeah.
I would say that there were several groups that I've been involved with, without getting into the details, but the major factor that was important in those groups was common, and it was trust. It was trust among the people, so that when we were talking about a subject that was pretty high level, let's say, and difficult to understand, we could argue and disagree, and yet walk away from that with a learning. The opposite of that, which you were just asking about, was with a group where there's an emotional response and lack of trust, and you walk away with no learning.
Okay, so that there was real trust. The group somehow, some way figured out enough trust with one another whereby it wasn't just trust was nice, it sounded like in this particular case, so that we could really uncover the complexity of this idea, or we could challenge each other's idea. And actually the diverse perspectives didn't tear us down, but that trust was there, and that actually maybe perhaps bumped us up a bit.
Yes.
How about some other kinds of qualities? Let's get a couple of more here. Please, the lady over there.
Yeah, maybe it goes without saying, but when you're working toward a common goal, when you're working toward...
You had a common goal in your group?
Right, you have an end product, and it might take quite a long time to get there, but if you all know that that's where you need to go, then you can work through that process together. And I really liked what he said about trust as well, because that just fosters an environment
Gotcha.
to get there.
But that common goal, so whether the common goal was we had a fundraising goal and so it was very prescriptive, we needed to get to that target, or whether it was a book club. I mean, what's the goal of a book club? Well, our goal was just to really go deep with the idea of whatever the theme was of this book. Still, we convened around a common goal. There was a way for us to get in it. I saw some other hands. The gentleman there, please.
I think the common denominator in our discussion was diversity. In my experience, young people, I always learn from the young people in the group, not from the older guys, because they challenge things and they are not political and so on, have no political agenda. And, sorry, what's your name? Bill. And Lynn's experience was basically the same with the respect of having people from other cultures, other countries into the discussions, also challenging the established wisdom and trust.
Gotcha. So a diverse perspective of cultures, but it also sounded like diverse perspectives of questions or ideas or perspectives. I asked the teachers this, I've asked parents this in lots of places. When and where have you been part of a culture of thinking? In fact, that's what I'm asking. Where have you been part of a group that did good thinking together and it really mattered to your learning? And the kinds of things you were just sharing, the kinds of things up on the screen, like, this isn't empirical evidence or anything. It's just like these are the kinds of things people often attribute to when these types of qualities, when these features are there, that group tends to take on a learning in another kind of way than, let's say, those counter places where these features aren't there. You know, we had a common goal, or there was a chance for all of our voices to be heard. You know, there was an outcome we cared about. We could be flexible. We could learn from our mistakes. If we went down a path, we could regroup, and actually that mistake was an opportunity, not a punishment. You know, various forms of these things probably played out in experiences that you were part of. And the one question that I've been asking teachers in lots of places is this: wouldn't it be the feather in your teaching CAP? Wouldn't it be really to your credit if years from now, students look back at your classroom as a place that felt like that? If I ask, let's say I'm having this conversation with some young teachers 10 years from now, and I say, when and where have you been part of a group that did good thinking together, and what made it that way? And all these young teachers I'm talking to in the future, they were all graduates of ISP. Wouldn't it be wonderful if they said, you know, back in Mr. So-and-so's class at the International School of Prague, really, what made it that way? Oh, well, we had a big exam to sit for. That IB had a lot of stuff on it, but he was really good about getting us to attend to each other's points of view. And that's now mattered to me in my workplace. Back in Miss So-and-so's class, back in Prague, really, what made it that way? Oh, well, it was fun and it was nice, but what she was really good at is anytime there was an unconventional response, anytime there was a mistake, she was really good about us as a group remaneuvering from there. It didn't feel like we were just getting through stuff, right? And so this is the kind of question that we start asking our teachers in this project to begin to consider. Because when there's a lot of material to go through in too little time, it's easy for Mondays through Fridays to start unfolding, but yet those Mondays through Fridays still sit within, are these things there or aren't they? And those things don't announce themselves, do me now, but rather we teachers have to really be reflective. Am I creating a space for these things to happen? And it's not this little thing that maybe I'll do on a Friday, but how is this a regular, ongoing, day-to-day part of how learning happens here with rigorous, rich, full curriculum items? So in our project, we talk somewhat about this idea that cultures of thinking are places in which a group's collective as well as individuals' thinking is visible, it's valued, actively promoted as part of the experience of that group. I mean, lay those three features there that I've got in yellow there. Lay it up against the groups you were just considering for yourself or recollecting. There was a chance for you individually and collectively to make your thinking visible, to get the invisible and get it out. There was some value to it. It mattered to how that group then debated and took an idea forward, it sounded like, in your experience. And it pushed us, right? The thinking wasn't this annoyance to our endeavoring. That thinking was the fuel for our endeavoring. And so if we know these things about cultures of thinking, we've experienced these things. Like Harvard Project Zero didn't invent that. What we're just trying to do is notice that, right? We know when these kinds of features are there, the learning goes to another place. So if we can shed light on that, if we can pay attention to that, then how does that then play out in terms of, as a teacher's perspective, what I plan for my students, how I interact with them, how I ask them to do something with the material? So what I want to do is step inside a classroom for a minute so you can just start operationalizing this. Some years ago, I taught at the International School of Amsterdam, and as a school, we were taking on these ideas. Much like, ISP here all these years later are thinking about really innovative things that keep them on the edge, right? These international schools are good places for that. So this is a classroom from when I was teaching back in Amsterdam. This is my colleague Lisa Verkerk, and as a school, we were really interested in how do we not lose sight of the thinking? How do our classrooms become thoughtful places of learning? F-U-L-L. What would it mean for us to create these cultures of thinking in our classrooms alongside of the busyness of any high-performing school that wants to do right by kids? So let's step in this classroom for a minute, and I want to ask you, what strikes you? What do you notice in this classroom? I want to also ask you this. What elements from your experience when you were part of a thoughtful group, those bullet points you wrote down, which of those elements do you see in action here, right? Maybe you were talking about this university cohort. This isn't university cohort, this is just a grade 5 classroom. But still, what elements of that trust or that perspective seeking or that collaboration or any of these other features having a common goal? Do you see an action here? And in terms of kids' thinking, where do you see thinking being made visible, having value, being used to really drive the learning? So how do we take what we know about cultures of thinking and then operationalize it in classrooms? So this teacher's just making a crack at that, if you will. So let's have a look. Take whatever notes you need, and then we'll have some debrief around that.
Okay, well, the children are studying human rights at the moment, and the reason that I wanted to use the routine of I see and I wonder is because I wanted to give the children an opportunity to look at situations where children didn't have their rights. The beauty of this routine is that it forces the children to slow down and to really look at what the pictures see and to focus on what is it that they really see. And then they can wonder about what that might mean. It stops them from drawing conclusions too quickly. Yesterday we looked at the conventions of the right of the child, and today we're going to carry on looking at that. The way that I want to do it is I want to give you some photographs to look at, and I want you to use a routine. I want you to use the routine we've used before. I see and I wonder. Okay, this aside. I've got a picture here, and it's not one that actually anybody's going to use. It's just one that I chose to show you now. Okay, so if we were to say, what do you see? What are the kinds of things that you might say about this? Alex?
Children saluting.
Children. You can see that they've got their hands up and they're saluting. Very good. Hyungjun.
I see a blackboard over there.
Okay, you see a blackboard. Is there any writing on the blackboard?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some writing on the blackboard. Miller?
A flag.
A flag.
I
Yeah.
see a girl dressed like a maid.
Okay, now look what you notice. You say dressed like a maid, but what is it about the girls' dresses that you notice?
They're old.
They're old.
They're old-fashioned.
Old-fashioned. Okay, and what is it about them that makes you say that they're old-fashioned?
Because we don't wear like those dresses nowadays.
Okay.
We wear like these kind of modern clothes.
What do you think might be going on with those children?
Singing. The saluting.
They seem to be saluting. So that's another one of I see, isn't it? I see them saluting. So I see a group of children. I see them saluting.
Maybe they're in an assembly or something.
Jin?
I wonder if they're singing their national song.
Okay, now why would you say...
They're looking at the flag and then they're going like this.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do this part, and then when we've all think that we've finished with this part, we're going to come together as a whole class again, and we're going to discuss what we found out about the different rights. It's going to be for Dhruv and Severin and Jun. Okay. All right.
What do you think is going on?
Like they come from different countries.
So much rights. Or is it the one? The girl is worried. We see. How can you tell if it's a girl? I think it's a boy. I doubt that.
We see a boy or girl who looks worried.
I wonder where they're from. Maybe it's the Second World War.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You think it might be in the Second World War. And what is it that's making you say that?
This and the German.
Because they don't really have...
Oh, this is written in German, is
Yeah,
it?
it says they're not allowed, I think.
No, their stuff
Okay.
isn't...
And this, they have it against a Jewish.
Is this, what is this sign here, Noah?
That's the Star of David.
That's the Star of David, and what do you think's being said here in this picture here?
It's not really... Yeah, it's not like he ate a lot. It doesn't look like that. Like, boom. Oh, come on. He like so hard. Yeah. Swollen, because he couldn't eat. Yeah. Oh, I think he's doing injection.
Okay, so you're saying over here, what do you think's going on? I think the kids are being forced to work. What makes you think they might be being forced rather than actually having agreed to?
I mean, he probably wanted to do it, but I mean, I don't think that kid would really want to be making. I don't think that's the nicest job. Yeah. He'd probably have another job.
Rather go to school?
Yeah.
Now, the next one's really interesting. You've said, I wonder if they are orphans. What made you say that?
It looks like they don't have a home. And also him. Yeah. Kind of looks like he lives there, maybe. But I don't really know. But we just thought some of them looked a bit like they didn't have a place to go to live. I mean, like these ones, these 5, they look like they had somewhere to go. But these 3 people, they looked a bit.
And what do you think you were basing that idea on? When you're looking at them, what is it that you can see about them that maybe thinks they have a home to go to?
They have clothes.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So. Okay, well done. So let's have a look at this. You've talked about the background that you've seen and the rubbish everywhere, child asking for something, the lady on her own with her baby, wearing dirty clothes. And over here you've said, I wonder if they are poor. I wonder if
There was war.
If there's been a war. I wonder if that's why the walls have got broken. I wonder if he's a beggar because he has a small bucket. I wonder if that's her job, but she doesn't get much money. This is the little girl cleaning the rubbish. I wonder if it's because they don't have any food, that their tummies are swollen. Oh, and the children are crying.
Yeah, and in America they got too much.
Yeah, with McDonald's, Burger King, pizza.
Right. Okay, you've done a really good job of looking at those pictures. I can see you've really tried to find an explanation for what's going on, and I really like the way that you used what you already know, things that you've already seen maybe on television or news reports. What we're going to do is you're going to come with your table and your photograph and come and sit up at the board, and we're going to see what conclusions we can draw about the pictures, and then you get a chance to look at each other's pictures as well. Hyungjun and Alex, can you tell us, quite simply, what was the big idea that you got from looking at these pictures? What were the things you were noticing and thinking might be going on?
Quite a lot of slavery.
But I'm going to pull you back a little bit, Alex, and ask you, what was it that you were seeing in all of the pictures then? What were you seeing before you got to the idea of slavery? What was it you were actually seeing?
We saw that all of the children were working.
Yeah.
And we wondered if they were forced to work.
Okay, yeah. Because, and why were some of the reasons that you thought that maybe they were being forced to work?
Because, like, some of the jobs that the people had were like one of the ones at the very top in the middle. Yeah. There are 2 children and they have bags on their back, and we thought they were maybe carrying garbage.
Yeah.
And they were being forced to do that. Their faces were all serious.
They're concentrating. The
Well,
one
carrying the bricks.
carrying the bricks.
I don't know.
Drew?
I'm sure that they obviously don't want to work, and they would much rather go to school. So I wonder if they're being driven by the extreme poverty.
Yeah.
And maybe their parents are making them work.
Okay, great. Now look, everybody, you've all done a really good job on each of your different pictures, and we'll share the others. And the idea of this is that then we'll be able to look at the connections between these different photographs and what's going on in different children's lives, and be able to draw a big conclusion about the rights of the child. I've used this routine several times during the year already, but what I was delighted to see was that it was becoming easier for them to do it. They were not getting distracted and forming conclusions too quickly. They were really looking carefully. And I think that the routine, although it's getting at thinking, it's also a social skill. It also is developing that social interaction, that ability to listen to each other and to think about what somebody else is saying. And so the thinking that happens in the classroom becomes more exciting because they're starting to build explanations and pictures, and they help each other to understand the situation better.
So let me put these slides back up. Have a chance to just debrief with the one person next to you. You know, what struck you? What did you notice? You were all parts of cultures of thinking yourselves, and you listed out the qualities, the features that were there. What elements from your experience being part of a group that did really good thinking together, albeit it could be a very different context than a fifth grade class, but still, what elements of your experience did you see in action there, and how so? In terms of students' thinking, where did you see thinking being made visible? What value did it have? What did you notice about the kids' thinking really driving their interactions and engagement with one another? So I'll go off microphone so you can have a chance to debrief a little. So as you stepped in that classroom there for just a moment, I mean, it gives us all a chance to go in and kind of see something in action. Just, again, not as a point of, okay, just that's the way it should be, but rather, as we step in there, what does it make us see and notice, and how does that relate to what we come to know about these, you know, cultures where thinking really drives learning? So what kinds of things came up for you? What were you seeing, noticing? Yeah, please, over here.
The kids trust each other and the teacher in the sense they are not afraid to share ideas just as they come to their heads. They're not worried about negative feedback, being laughed at. You know, it's evident that they say what they think, how they look.
Yeah, so you noticed something about the kids trusting that they could bring their ideas out there. Well, I guess we don't rewind video anymore, but if you scroll back, how do you know that they were trusting? What was it that you were seeing that made you say that?
They're asked and they freely answer. You see, they don't, you know, think twice. They don't do the facially like uncertain. Nothing of that. You see, they totally openly respond.
Okay, great. What are some other things that you're noticing? Yes, please.
I noticed an excellence of the teacher and the expertise and the experience that she has and the way how she structured work with the group to actually create this safe environment for the kids.
Okay, so you use that adjective excellence there. So if you had to point something out and say there's excellence, like what did you see that made you come to that adjective? Like what was it that she was doing, or?
Yeah, how she asked questions to the kids, how she framed the idea
Gotcha.
at the beginning, then how she asked questions. There was constant interaction, actually back and forth between the students, but also how she structured the work itself, the operational side of the lesson. There's actually, those tools are extremely helpful for the kids to make the thinking visual.
Got you, visible, yep. Some other kinds of things, yeah, please.
There was that flexibility you talked about, like she was able to bring them back if they needed to be led back to the goal and things like that. I thought she was an excellent teacher.
Okay, so that flexibility there. So, well, she even said, you know, my fifth graders have a tendency to rush to a conclusion before they've seen and noticed everything, and she wants to figure that out. That's not just a fifth grade dilemma, right? There's lots of people who do, we all do that. But so she said, so when they did jump into, well, we think they might be orphans, okay, so what did you see that makes you say that? So there was always that kind of structure to, so we're not just guessing here, what did you see that makes you say that? And then what's that make you wonder? So there was some flexibility around that structure, if you will. Something else?
I just wanted to say that what strikes me most, and we were discussing that in the group, that this concept that she was teaching, human rights, it's very abstract. But the way she teaches with those pictures from very particular moments of the children's lives is very concrete. So it gives the children a chance to learn it as if from their experience, as if they were children, and through their experience and comparing their lives to what other children's don't. So this abstract and particular visible thing, what strikes me most in this approach.
So there was a real opportunity for them to step inside this, to look at it from another angle, not just take in information about the rights of the child, but then to do something with that information. Albeit it wasn't a university, they're not older kids, but what does it mean for 10-year-olds, in this case, to take in this information? Why do humans even need rights? Especially if I've got a home to go to and a bed to sleep in and food to eat, aren't all children like me? Like, how would a 10-year-old not know that? Except there's a lot of 10-year-olds, there's a lot of other children who aren't like that. And so she wanted them to not just take in the information, but she wanted them to do something with it, to consider another viewpoint, to start uncovering complexity, to generate some real inquiry. I'm going to just play my facilitator's card here and just kind of help push a little bit of the analysis here. Because, you know, we could look at that video and think, well, she got really good kids that year, or that's a really nice calm space, a beautiful classroom, or this teacher, she's just really, really good. I know this teacher. I worked with her for several years, and I taught 6th grade. I got her students. But at the same, so she is excellent in many, many ways. But when I work with the teachers around these ideas, I think, okay, if we just say, okay, this is just because she got the lottery, the stars aligned, and she's just really, really good, then what's the hope for me as a classroom teacher? Because I'm not Lisa. And so trying to pull the curtain back and think, where was she being intentional? Where was this practitioner making some real choices to send messages to her students that their thinking matters in this place? Because if we can pull the curtain back on that and debunk the mystery, well, then that gives me hope as a teacher to then take some actions myself. Even though I'm not Lisa, I'm me, but I can still think about the kinds of things she was thinking about. So in many ways, we were really thinking about how do we understand this classroom and the story that was going on there. And in our research work, we were really thinking, well, how does a classroom story get communicated? When you've come into this classroom, how do you know this is what matters here? There are certain things this teacher was making some choices around that was shaping the story, that their perspective seeking, their complexity uncovering, their wondering mattered. One thing you were noticing was there's some routines and structures in place for them to see, to think, to wonder, right? That wasn't just a one-time thing. They had done that in many places. That's why those kids were seeing, thinking, wondering was a habit, not just an activity they did that one time with those laminated pictures, right? The routine was sending messages, looking closely, developing a theory, wondering. That is a good way to take on learning. It's not the only way, but it's a good one. And you can do it when you're 10, you can do it when you're 50. Seeing, thinking, wondering is something we'll do when we look at the newspaper and say, what's going on here? What's this make? What do we see? What do we think's going on? What do we wonder? So you notice some things about the routines and structures. You notice some things about time. There was time for them to put their ideas together. There was time to build on each other's ideas. There was time for them to look closely and even look more closely when other kids were convening around that same thing, much like the groups you were a part of that did good thinking. There were things around the opportunities there. There was the opportunities not just to absorb information, but there was an opportunity for them to do something with these images, right? So now that you step inside, what do you see, think? Now, what does that make you wonder? What questions does this make us ask? So if we're really going to study this, we have some good questions to drive us forward. You were noticing things about the modeling of that teacher. In many ways, see, think, wonder was a routine, but it was also modeling for those kids. That's a great pattern of behavior you can take to texts that we read, videos that we watch, concepts that we study. Seeing, thinking, wondering is a pattern that we could bring to lots of occasions. I'm only highlighting that one because that was in the video. There are other patterns of thinking too, but you can see she was giving them models. How will the kids know that that's a good way of thinking unless they experience that model over and over and over again in lots of context? You were noticing things about the interactions in that classroom, building on each other's ideas, but also the teacher interacting and how she redirected. Oh, you think they might be this, then how? You saw that interaction a lot, and those interactions was sending a message. Who's doing the learning in here? Right? She kept that steering wheel in their hands as much as she possibly could. You were noticing things about the environment of that classroom, the language, the kinds of questions she was asking. You were noticing things about expectations. Not just the expectations that they would do the work, but the expectations that we can take a big idea and we can bring our thinking to this big idea and individually and collectively advance our understanding, our knowledge, and so on and so forth. And all of these things were working together to shape the story of Lisa's classroom. These cultural forces were shaping that story. But what I would say is all of these things shape the story of any classroom. Would you like that? You like that one? It's not an International School of Amsterdam thing, and it's not that one excellent teacher thing. What do we want for all classrooms? And what gets modeled, what routines get put in place, the language that gets consistently used sends messages to all of these kids at this school or any other school. We can go off this campus and go to the next school and the next school and the next school. How these things and the choices teachers are making around those things matter greatly. They let everybody know this matters here or not. And I think in the busyness of schools, sometimes we lose sight of that because I've got all this material to get through. But I can get through material, and all of these things will say to the kids, your thinking doesn't matter here unless I get really conscious about it. So in our work with teachers, we're thinking an awful lot about how does my classroom become a culture of thinking operationally? And we would say that cultures of thinking exist when these cultural forces of a classroom really direct themselves and align themselves with the kinds of thinking you did when you were parts of groups that did good thinking. Perspective seeking, uncovering complexity, making connections, looking closely. And a teacher is either making choices, do I want that to be a part of my classroom or not? And sometimes the teacher's like, I don't know if I want these to be in my classroom or not. And I always say, well, that's not your choice because they're already there. Every classroom models something. Every classroom has language around something. Every classroom has routines around something. So what is the something? So as ISP really thinks about who we are now, who we will be, some bit of time from now, but who we will be long into the future, then where does our attention to these cultural forces really play out there? A couple of things as we wrap up. On your table there, I've given you a handout of just some ways that parents in other schools have really partnered with schools to help them around this journey, right? Parents play another role, right? The non-parent adult in a child's life is one thing. The parent is certainly instrumental. You play a certain role, right, that a teacher can never do. But how do we partner together in this? There are some ideas there that my colleague Ron Richhart put together where parents like yourselves really want to advance it. I'll draw your attention to just a few things and then wrap up. One thing I think you could do is develop this growth mindset with the students. If students are very fixed, I'm not good at that. This is from Carol Dweck's research, not ours, but it has a lot of synergy there where all these threads, do you see, start coming together. If my child in front of me just feels like I'm not good at this, then I've got to get them out of that fixed mindset and say, well, actually intelligence and understanding, thinking actually is dynamic, and it can grow and it can be learned. So I think things like, when we ask our kids to take on a growth mindset and stay soft with it rather than fixed, it really is encouraging that risk-taking, collaboration, enjoyment of the challenge. Focus on the process with them, not their attributes. And by that I mean, you might say, you did a great job with developing a plan for that rather than, oh, you're so clever. Clever is an attribute. And of course your child is clever. But that's not very helpful, right? Because then the child starts thinking, oh, some of us are clever and some aren't. And at some point, I'm not believing my mom anymore because I don't think I'm so clever. And so you want to get away from the attributes and start saying, okay, well, that seems like that's a pretty solid plan that you've got going on there. Talk to me about that. So I'm really highlighting, oh, we can develop plans and processes. For example, there's some more written on there. Here's another way. I'm just highlighting a few. There's 10 of them there. But I think this is really important. How do we challenge our students or our children, but not rescue them or know when rescue is needed, right? Don't rescue too soon. You might have to sometimes. And I think this is really about helping them to develop their own intellectual resilience. And that is being mindful of how old they are. But at the same time, if I always jump in to rescue them, then who's doing the learning? A friend of mine was talking about, she said, I've got this image of a driver's education instructor in my mind. I want to keep the steering wheel in my student driver's hand as much of the time as possible because they have to learn to drive. I can take the wheel and I can get us from point A to point B safely, efficiently, and quickly. But the more I do that, then it's no longer driver's training. Then it's chauffeur. Then it's taxi. Right? So as a teacher, I keep thinking, the more I take that wheel, yeah, I can get us there, but then it's just, these kids are just along for the ride. They're not learning to drive. So I think it's really important to keep the steering wheel in their hands. So asking questions to help them think through the problem or identify a plan, choose a course of action, and that means sometimes you might have to suck up some of the swerves, but that's sometimes what's needed when students are learning to quote-unquote drive. If you're going towards a ditch, by all means, you take the wheel. But don't take it too soon. So you have to get really savvy with that. Parents could do that, as can teachers. Last thing here, I think the language we use is really important. When we notice and name types of thinking, really point that out. Lisa, that classroom teacher, which you described as excellence, it wasn't that she just had this, aura about her. There was certain language she was using. That's an interesting theory. So how did you see these things connected? Okay, where did you base that idea on? She was saying things like that. So she was really trying to notice the thinking they were doing. Now that's a perspective I haven't thought about. If nothing else, this could be a takeaway for all of you. This is a magic question in many ways. So talk to me. What makes you say that? Don't ask that if you really don't want to know what makes them say that. But really ask yourself, can I exhibit curiosity in my child? And say, okay, wow, you think we shouldn't do that? Well, what makes you say that? It's about asking them to make their thinking visible. Guys, time has run short. I hope that this has been interesting for you, and I'll turn it back over to Teresa or to Arnie. Thank you. Thank you so much.
So firstly, I'd like to thank Mark. As I mentioned, Mark has been with us all week, working with teachers, working with school leaders as well, with parents, and so on. And what he has pointed out is that teaching is as much an art as it is a science. You need the research to understand how we learn and what is most effective. And then you need a talented teacher who can learn that craft and apply it with kids. And I'm always so impressed when I walk into the classroom, as I did just yesterday, walking to a few classrooms. And what we all do when we do that, principals and so on, is we talk to the kids and we ask them about their learning. We don't stare at the teacher. We ask the kids about their learning. And that tells you so much about what they take away from that process. And I want to thank Mark for working with us. We've learned a lot from his visit, and there's a lot more to learn. And as a learning organization, we're going to continue to do that. That professional development, professional learning is crucial to keeping us moving forward. We have certainly the opportunity to ask questions of Mark. I don't know if we want to do it together, or do we want to break up and do you want to take some questions from the group, or do
well, I'm mindful of the time, so if you need to make your escape, you can make your escape. Those that stay around, then we can spend a few more minutes. Do you think that'd be all right?
Sure, that's fine. So Mark is here. As he said, if you need to make your escape, go ahead and do it. But thanks so much to Mark Church. It's really a pleasure to have you here at the school. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.